one. Panel, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's rather entertaining that debaters, and not just debaters, but students who are from a Jesuit institution and an Opus Dei institution are now talking about hypersexuality. It's honestly entertaining. But we think that's precisely why these things have to be destigmatized and shed light upon, because there tend to be oppressive existing structures from both far ends of the spectrum that try to dictate what you are and who you ought to be. Ladies and gentlemen, hypersexualization is the greatest thing to happen to the LGBTQ community, and we think that this is exactly the antithesis we need against oppressive conservative institutions that for far too long have told women, have told queers to stay in the light. Before I move on to my case, we think a very important stance coming from our side is to understand why is it in the interest of the LGBTQ community to actively support the dominance of hypersexuality and not reject it. We think this is akin to supporting things that exist already in status quo, things that the movement has fought for, things like sexual promiscuity among queers and trans individuals in a world wherein bigots would tell you, you are gay, when you have sex, I hope you die because of AIDS. No trigger warning meant, but there really are people who believe those ideologies, and these very people have to be silenced. We think in something important coming from our side of the house are a few responses towards the previous speaker. The first is when they tell us that it's weird and you offend people and people have certain kinks. But we have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that these kinks are part of sexual iteration and discovery, whether you choose to be a part of the movement or whether you're heterosexual. It's part of your identity that you have to go through. In fact, it's on their world when you don't talk about it that people just have vanilla sex, for instance, or these concepts are considered taboo and people aren't able to talk about it. We get better on discourse on our side when people who are more vocal are able to participate in the discourse as opposed to being silent. Secondly, they assert this idea about people do not consent to it and people cannot opt out. We think in terms of scope and scale, there are more people on our side who are going to be affected who can't talk about it because now conservative patriarchies and religious structures are now going to tell these people who they ought to be and start shaming and molding these particular identities. Where does abuse then happen? It happens when these things are talked about inside the closet, ladies and gentlemen, inside the mentoring room, inside the confessional, wherein you have no one to confide to other than a priest or a mentor, and that's exactly where all these sketchy PDF files individuals come out. We better hold them accountable. Fourth is in terms of this assertion that the youth are going to be affected and particular aromantic individuals are not going to be able to feel safe. We think that on our side of the house, we actually push institutions and schools to actually be able to have sex ed programs, because even in status quo, for instance, in these particular religious organizations, it's all values formation. They don't particularly talk about it. But before that, go ahead, POI.
So this debate assumes that we are against hypersexuality. That's not the debate. The debate's about the dominance of hypersexuality in all of LGBT spaces.
First response is that I think it's a kind of a soft stance coming from your side of the house, because we think you also have to defend why that in and of itself is true. And we think that the dominance argument is very simple. It has to be the dominant ideology, because far too long the conservatives have held power and have told women and people and queers who they are and how they should dress. And we think this is precisely an effective antithesis against that. What is the nuance exactly to why it has to be hypersexualized? It has to be hypersexualized because these particular institutions who have clout and power tell women and queers how they should act and how they should be a particular way. We think that in order to challenge these particular structures, we need to deal with that accordingly. What is my argument, right? My argument here is about why sexual identity and liberation of people from the community can only happen through a sphere of hypersexualization. Because side government tries to say, why does it have to be hyper? What di pwede normal lang or something like that. But the point, ladies and gentlemen, is that all forms of discourse, even if they offend you, even if they're on the far ends of the spectrum, are literal portions of these particular sexual discussion. In fact, it's on your side where more people are going to be closeted and more people are going to feel safe and more people are going to have their reputations shot upon because now they're going to say, hey, that person's a hoe, that person's a slut. And we think that the evolution of hypersexuality was a response for what we saw in the past with historians and all particular people who were particularly patriarchs, right? That's how feminism and the queer movement evolved, wherein they were able to take on particular brands of feeling safe. Things like free the nipple, for instance. Things like women now being able to be liberalized when they take on certain jobs as being a porn star or being a director in institutions that otherwise were only for men, and only men and those particular individuals had that power. Ladies and gentlemen, we desensitize harmful topics on our side of the house when they no longer become taboo, and we ultimately economically empower people to make these particular choices. Because for far too long, it was only a man or an individual who was able to do that. Even for the LGBTQ community, it was only a heterosexual couple who was able to do that. When they have sex, for instance, like celebrities, oh, that's hot, that's a scandal, we want to watch those things. But when it's someone in a drag show, for instance, we find that disgusting. When it's Caitlyn Jenner on the cover of Sports Illustrated, you have people like Dave Chappelle saying, yuck. We think that's a disgrace. We think we need to challenge the lens of how we view sexuality, and the only way we can best silence bigots and silence people and allow people to make a more informed decision about their own sexuality is when you have the antithesis exist. Yes, it will be scandalous. Yes, people will get offended. Yes, people will get pissed off. But ladies and gentlemen, that's where movements can better coalesce to form pockets of identity for people to feel safe and people to feel that they can find a sense of belongingness and better identify in which buckets they fit within a particular community. So ultimately, we tell you that this is a necessary and urgent impetus to challenge particular oppressive structures, and ultimately, it becomes an effective means of people being able to discover themselves, feel better about their identity, have better sex, have better education, and ultimately have a better society. We are very proud to stand on side opposition.